I never thought it would happen. Not like this, not with him. The silence of the house made every glance, every touch felt more dangerous, more forbidden. But when he walked into my room that night, something shifted between us, something we couldn't ignore any longer. I knew it was wrong, yet as he stood there, his eyes filled with the same unspoken desire I felt, all sense of caution disappeared. In that moment, everything changed, and there was no going back. It was late. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that made everything feel heavier, more intense. Outside, the moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow through the windows, lighting up the empty hallways with an eerie, almost ethereal light. I was in my room, lying on my bed, trying to focus on anything but the thoughts swirling in my head. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, there was one thing I couldn't escape. Him. He had only been in my life for a short time, but it felt like longer. Ever since my mom married him, everything had been different. At first, I tried to ignore it, to brush it off as nothing more than awkwardness between two people who didn't know each other very well, but the more time we spent together, the harder it became to deny the truth. There was something between us, something unspoken, but undeniable. It hung in the air whenever we were in the same room, a tension that neither of us could break but both of us felt. I knew it was wrong. I told myself over and over again that it was wrong. He was technically my stepfather now, and there were lines that shouldn't be crossed. But the more I tried to fight it, the more I found myself drawn to him. There was something about the way he looked at me, the way his eyes lingered just a little too long, the way his touch felt warmer than it should, even when it was accidental. Every time we passed each other in the hallway or brushed hands while sitting at the dinner table, my heart would race, my skin would tingle, and I would have to remind myself to breathe. And then there were the stolen glances, the moments when I would catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. His gaze was intense, searching, like he was trying to figure out if I felt it too. And I did. God, I did. I felt it more than I wanted to admit. But I couldn't say anything. I couldn't act on it. Not when it was so wrong. Not when we both knew better. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I tried to push those thoughts away. I tried to remind myself of all the reasons why this couldn't happen. But then, I heard a soft knock at my door. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment I considered pretending I was asleep, pretending I hadn't heard anything. But then the door creaked open, and he stepped inside. He looked different tonight, more vulnerable, less composed. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something else, something softer. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the doorway, his eyes locking onto mine, the tension between us thickening by the second. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "I shouldn't be here." But I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I didn't know what to say. All I knew was that I didn't want him to leave. Not now, not after everything we'd been holding back for so long. He took a step closer, hesitating for a moment, as if waiting for me to tell him to go. But I didn't. Instead, I sat up, my pulse quickening as he slowly crossed the room and sat down on the edge of the bed. The space between us felt like it was shrinking, even though neither of us had moved. "I've been trying to fight this," he admitted, his voice shaking slightly. "I've been trying to do the right thing, to keep my distance, but it's getting harder. Every time I see you, every time we're alone together, I can't stop thinking about you." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything we hadn't said. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I didn't know how to respond to what he had just confessed, but I knew deep down that I felt the same. I had been fighting it too, telling myself it wasn't real, that it was just a fleeting attraction. But now, sitting here with him, I couldn't deny it any longer. "I don't know what to say," I finally whispered, my voice trembling. "I feel it too. I've felt it for a while. His gaze softened, and for a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something, to reassure me, but he didn't. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing lightly against mine. My heart raced as I felt the warmth of his touch, the closeness of him. There was something so intimate about the way he was looking at me now, like I was the only thing that mattered in the world at that moment. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "I shouldn't be doing this. I know it's wrong, but I can't stop." My breath caught in my throat as he leaned in closer, his face just inches from mine. I could feel his breath on my skin, warm and inviting, and every rational thought I had seemed to disappear. I knew I should pull away, that I should stop this before it went too far, but I couldn't. There was something magnetic about him, something that drew me in and made it impossible to resist. "I don't want you to stop," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I don't want this to end." He hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching mine for any sign of doubt, but there was none. I wanted this. I wanted him. More than anything, I wanted to feel what it was like to finally give in to the desire that had been building between us for so long. Slowly, he closed the remaining distance between us, his lips brushing against mine in the softest of kisses. It was tentative at first, almost as if he was afraid of pushing too far, too fast. But as the kiss deepened, the hesitation melted away, replaced by a passion that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. His hand cupped the back of my neck, pulling me closer, as our lips moved together in perfect sync. Every touch, every kiss sent a surge of electricity through my body, making my skin tingle with anticipation. My hand slid up his chest, feeling the warmth of his body beneath my fingertips as I pulled him closer, needing to feel him against me. There was no more space between us now, no more barriers. It was just him and me, lost in the moment, caught up in something we couldn't control. For what felt like hours, we stayed like that, our kisses growing more urgent, more desperate, as if we were trying to make up for all the time we had spent holding back. The world outside the room didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was the way he made me feel, the way his touch set my skin on fire, the way his breath against my neck sent shivers down my spine. But even as the passion between us grew, there was still a part of me that knew we had to be careful. We couldn't let this get out of hand. We couldn't let anyone find out. The consequences would be too great. I pulled back slightly, my breathing ragged as I tried to gather my thoughts. "We have to be careful," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "We can't let anyone know." He nodded. He tried to catch his breath. "I know, but I don't care anymore. I don't care if it's wrong. I don't care what anyone thinks. I want you." His words sent a thrill through me, and for a moment, I forgot all about the risks, about the consequences. All I could think about was him, about the way he made me feel, about the way my heart raced every time he touched me. But before we could get any further, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway outside my room, and my heart jumped into my throat. Panic surged through me as I realized how close we were to being caught. I pulled away, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I looked toward the door, half expecting someone to walk in at any moment. "We have to stop," I said, my voice shaking. "We can't let them catch us." He nodded, though I could see the same frustration in his eyes that I felt. He didn't want to stop any more than I did, but we both knew we didn't have a choice. He stood up, running a hand through his hair as he tried to steady his breathing. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't mean to put you in this position." I shook my head, standing up and taking a step toward him. "Don't be sorry, I wanted this too." For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other, the weight of everything that had happened hanging heavy in the air. I didn't know what would happen next, didn't know how we would navigate this new reality. All I knew was that nothing between us would ever be the same again. He reached out, his hand brushing lightly against my cheek. "We'll figure this out," he said softly. his eyes filled with determination. "I promise." And even though I knew it wouldn't be easy, I believed him. Because in that moment, with the tension still hanging thick between us, I knew that no matter what happened, we were in this together. And that was enough. We stood there, the air still thick with tension, our eyes locked, knowing we had crossed a line. His fingers lingered on my cheek, the heat from his touch searing into my skin, making it impossible to pull away. I could feel his breath, shallow and uneven, matching the rhythm of my own. The space between us felt charged, electric, as if everything that had been simmering below the surface was on the verge of boiling over. I swallowed hard, trying to find the words, but nothing came. The weight of what we had just done hung between us like a thick fog, and I knew, we both knew, that there was no going back now. Whatever we had been fighting was too strong, too real to be ignored. His hand, still resting on my cheek, slid down to my jawline. "I don't want to stop," he whispered, his voice raw and thick with emotion, his thumb brushing gently over my lips. "I don't want this to end." His words sent a rush of heat through me, a pulse of desire that I couldn't contain. I had tried to fight it for so long, tried to convince myself that what I felt for him was wrong, forbidden. But now that we were here, now that we had crossed that line, I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. Not about the rules, not about the consequences, nothing. All I could think about was him, about the way he made me feel like no one else ever had. "We don't have to stop," I whispered, barely able to get the words out, my voice trembling with the weight of the moment. "I don't care anymore. I want this too." His eyes darkened, and before I knew what was happening, he pulled me close, his hands gripping my waist, his body pressing against mine. The heat between us was undeniable now, the fire that had been burning inside me for so long finally blazing out of control. His lips crashed into mine, more urgent this time, more desperate. The kiss wasn't soft or tentative like before. It was filled with everything we had been holding back, every bit of passion and longing we had suppressed for so long. My hands found their way to his chest, feeling the muscles beneath his shirt, the steady thrum of his heartbeat racing just as fast as mine. His hands moved up my back, his fingers tracing my skin in a way that made every nerve in my body come alive. I couldn't think, couldn't focus on anything but him. The world around us faded into nothingness, leaving only the two of us, tangled together in a whirlwind of desire and need. He pulled me closer, his breath ragged as he murmured against my lips, "I've wanted this for so long. I tried to stay away. I tried to do the right thing, but I can't anymore." I moaned softly into his mouth, my fingers gripping his shirt as I felt myself getting lost in the moment, in him. Every kiss, every touch sent waves of heat crashing through me, and I knew that there was no turning back now. We were too far gone. The footsteps we had heard earlier seemed like a distant memory now, forgotten in the intensity of what was happening. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew we were still walking a dangerous line, that someone could walk in at any moment, and we'd be caught. But the thought of getting caught only seemed to fuel the fire between us. The risk, the danger of it all, made everything feel even more intoxicating, like we were both on the edge of something we couldn't control. His lips moved to my neck, soft and warm, leaving a trail of kisses that made my knees weak. I gasped, tilting my head back to give him more access. My heart racing so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. His hands were everywhere, roaming my body like he couldn't get enough, like he had been starved for this just as much as I had. "I don't want anyone to know," I whispered breathlessly, my fingers digging into his shoulders as he kissed along my collarbone. "But I can't stop. I don't want to stop." He pulled back slightly, just enough to look me in the eyes, his gaze intense and filled with a raw hunger that mirrored my own. "Then we won't stop," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "We'll keep this between us. No one has to know." His words sent a thrill through me, and before I could say anything, he captured my lips in another searing kiss, his hands gripping my waist tighter, pulling me flush against him. The heat between us was unbearable now, a fire that couldn't be contained. Every touch, every kiss felt like a promise, a declaration that this wasn't just some fleeting moment. This was something we both had been craving for far too long. We moved together in a rhythm that felt almost instinctual, like our bodies knew exactly what to do, where to touch, how to kiss. It was as if all the time we had spent holding back, all the months of denying what we felt had finally erupted into this. A moment of pure, unbridled passion. My mind was spinning, my body trembling with need, and I couldn't think of anything but him. His hand slid beneath my shirt, his touch sending waves of heat through me, and I moaned softly into his mouth, arching into him. I didn't care about the risks anymore. I didn't care about what would happen if someone found out. All I cared about was him, about the way he made me feel alive, in a way I had never felt before. "Tell me you want this," he whispered against my lips, his breath hot against my skin. "Tell me you need this as much as I do." "I do," I gasped, my voice barely audible. "I need this. I need you." His lips crushed against mine once more, and I knew, in that moment, that there was no turning back. We had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and I didn't want to. Not anymore. This was what I had been waiting for, what I had been wanting for so long, and now that I had it, I wasn't going to let it go. Everything around us faded away, the world outside the room disappearing into nothingness as we lost ourselves in each other. Time seemed to stretch, the night slipping away as we gave in to everything we had been fighting for so long. We were no longer stepfather and stepson, no longer bound by the rules and expectations that had kept us apart. We were just two people, caught up in something bigger than either of us, something we couldn't deny. And as the night went on, as we held each other close, I knew that no matter what happened next, no matter the risks or the consequences, I wouldn't regret this. Because in his arms, I had found something I hadn't even known I was searching for. Something real, something undeniable. And that was worth everything.